Imagine waking up to the tantalizing aroma of freshly baked bread, a delight that fills up every corner of your home. There's something undeniably comforting and heartwarming about the scent of homemade bread wafting through your home. It's like a warm hug, a promise of something delicious and satisfying just around the corner. The aroma of bread fresh from the oven is one of life's simple pleasures, a pleasure that's about to become a part of your everyday routine. Homemade bread is more than just a culinary delight. It's a sensory experience that begins long before the first bite. From the soft, pliable dough beneath your fingers to the golden crust that crackles under the gentlest pressure, each stage of bread making is a testament to the magic of transformation. And then there's the taste. The rich, complex flavors that dance on your tongue, the perfect balance of sweetness and earthiness, the subtle notes of caramelization. Each bite is an affirmation of the time and effort you poured into this labor of love. It's an experience that store-bought bread can never quite replicate. In this video, we'll guide you step by step through the process of making your own homemade bread. We'll delve into the intricacies of yeast and gluten, the art of kneading and proofing, and the science of baking. We'll demystify the process, breaking it down into manageable steps that even a beginner can follow. But this journey is about more than just learning a new recipe. It's about connecting with centuries-old traditions, about understanding the alchemy that turns simple ingredients into something extraordinary. It's about the joy of creation and the satisfaction of sharing something you made with your own two hands. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, they say. In our case, the journey to the perfect loaf of bread begins with a single grain of wheat. So dust off your countertops, roll up your sleeves, and gather your ingredients. Ready your aprons, because today you are the master baker. The secret to a great loaf lies in its ingredients. First on our list is flour, the backbone of our bread. You can opt for all-purpose flour, but bread flour is the ideal choice. It's higher in protein, which helps create a more robust structure, contributing to that perfect chewy texture we all love in our bread. Next, we have yeast, the unsung hero of bread making. Yeast is a type of fungus that feeds on the sugars in our dough, producing carbon dioxide gas. This gas gets trapped in the dough, causing it to rise and give our bread that delightful, airy texture. So, remember to treat your yeast with care, for it's the breath of life in our bread. Now, let's not forget about the salt. While it might seem like a minor detail, salt plays a crucial role in flavoring our bread. But that's not all. It also controls yeast activity and strengthens the dough's gluten structure. So don't skip it. A pinch of salt can make a world of difference. Then we have sugar, the sweet whisper in our recipe. Besides adding a hint of sweetness, sugar feeds our yeast, helping it work its magic. You can use white granulated sugar, but feel free to experiment with brown sugar or honey for a unique flavor profile. Lastly, we need warm water. Why warm? Well, yeast loves a cozy environment, and warm water provides just that. It helps activate the yeast, setting the stage for our dough to rise. Now, a quick reminder, always aim for high-quality ingredients. They can significantly impact the final result. After all, great bread is a sum of its parts, and each component plays its part in creating the perfect loaf. With these simple ingredients, we're set to create something extraordinary. The heart of any bread is its dough. At the heart of our bread-making adventure lies the preparation of the dough. This process is a delicate dance of ingredients, each playing a vital role in giving our bread its character. Let's dive in and see how it's done. First, we begin with the flour. This is the backbone of our dough, providing the structure and substance to our bread. While there are many types of flour to choose from, we're going for good old all-purpose flour today. It's versatile, readily available, and perfect for our homely bread. Next, we introduce our yeast. This is our raising agent, the magic that will help our dough rise and become that fluffy, airy bread we all love. We're using active dry yeast, which needs to be dissolved in warm water before adding to the flour. Remember, the water should be warm, not hot, as too much heat can kill our yeast. After the yeast has been dissolved, it's time to pour it into our flour. But we're not just dumping it in. No, we're gradually incorporating it, stirring as we go along. This gradual addition allows the flour to properly absorb the water and yeast, ensuring a smooth, well-integrated dough. Now let's talk about salt. It might seem like a minor player in this game, but salt plays a critical role in flavor enhancement and helps control the yeast's activity. A pinch is all we need, but it makes a world of difference. With all our ingredients in the bowl, it's time for the kneading process. Kneading is a rhythmic, repetitive action that helps develop the gluten in our flour. This is what gives our bread its chewy, springy texture. To knead, we push, fold, and turn the dough, repeating this motion until it's smooth and elastic. But how do you know when it's kneaded enough? Well, it's all about the texture. The dough should be smooth, not sticky, and have a slight spring to it. When you press it with your finger, it should slowly bounce back. If it does, you've kneaded enough. If it doesn't, keep kneading. Now, there are those who might ask, can I over-knead my dough? The answer is yes. Over-kneading can result in a tough, dense bread. So, it's important to be mindful during this process. Remember, you're looking for a smooth, springy dough, not a workout. Once our dough has been kneaded to perfection, it's time for the first rest. This is when we let our dough sit, covered, in a warm, draft-free spot. This rest period allows the yeast to ferment, creating gas bubbles that will make our dough rise and give our bread its airy texture. After the dough has rested, we give it a gentle punch down. This helps distribute the yeast and gas evenly throughout the dough, ensuring a uniform rise during baking. Finally, we shape our dough. This is where you can get creative. Want a round loaf? Shape it into a ball. Prefer a long baguette-style loaf? Shape it into a log. The choice is yours. Just make sure to seal any seams or folds to prevent the bread from splitting during baking. As we come to the end of our dough preparation process, remember that patience is key. Bread making is not a rush job. It's a labor of love, a process that requires time and care. But the reward, a loaf of warm, freshly baked bread, is well worth the effort. Now that we've shaped our dough, it's time to let it rest and rise. Proofing is where the magic happens. Now that we've prepared our dough, it's time to let it rest and rise. This process, known as proofing, is a fundamental part of bread making. It's the period where the yeast ferments the dough, creating carbon dioxide gas that inflates the gluten network, resulting in a dough that rises. Proofing is essential because it gives our bread its structure and flavor. Without proofing, our bread would be flat and dense, lacking the delightful airy texture we all love so much. The yeast, during this process, not only helps the dough rise, but also imparts a subtle, distinctive flavor that is characteristic of homemade bread. Creating the ideal proofing environment is crucial. You want a warm, draft-free spot for your dough to rise. The optimum temperature for yeast growth is around 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. If you don't have a warm spot in your home, you can create one by heating a cup of water in the microwave, removing it, and then placing your covered dough in the warm microwave to rise. Humidity is another factor to consider. A slightly humid environment helps keep the dough surface soft during rising, allowing for maximum expansion. Cover your dough with a damp cloth or plastic wrap to achieve this effect. Now let's talk about time. Proofing is not a step you can rush. Patience is key here. Depending on the recipe, the proofing period can range anywhere from 1 hour to several hours. It's worth noting that overproofing or letting your dough rise for too long can be just as detrimental as underproofing. Overproofed dough can collapse in the oven, resulting in a dense, heavy loaf. So, keep an eye on your dough and follow your recipe's guidelines. A handy tip to check if your dough has proofed enough is the poke test. Gently poke your dough with your finger. If the indent springs back slowly, your dough is ready. If it springs back immediately, it needs more time. If the indent stays and doesn't spring back, your dough has overproofed. Remember, proofing is not an exact science. It's an art form that you'll master with practice and observation. Each batch of dough can behave differently based on factors like the temperature and humidity of your kitchen, the freshness of your yeast, and even the type of flour you're using. So, don't be discouraged if your first few attempts don't turn out perfect. Part of the joy of bread making is learning, experimenting, and improving with each bake. As our dough rises, we're one step closer to our homemade loaf. As we move on to the next steps, take a moment to appreciate the transformation your dough is undergoing. It's a beautiful process, isn't it? The proofing stage is a testament to the wonder of bread making, where simple ingredients like flour, water, and yeast come together to create something truly special. A well-shaped loaf is not just beautiful, but bakes more evenly. Now that we've put in the work to bring our dough to life, it's time to give it a form. Shaping the loaf is an art in its own right, and it's crucial to achieving that perfect, even bake we all strive for. Let's dive in, shall we? Start by patting the dough gently into a rectangle about the width of your loaf pan. The length isn't as crucial, it's the width that will determine how well the loaf fits into its baking vessel. Remember, we're not trying to flatten the dough, just shape it. Be gentle and let the dough's elasticity guide you. Next, it's time to roll the dough. Starting at one end, roll the dough tightly towards the other end. This tight roll is essential because it helps create that classic loaf structure we all know and love. Think about it like rolling a sleeping bag. You're trying to create a tight, uniform roll that will bake evenly. But what about the ends, you ask? Well, that's where sealing comes in. Once you've rolled your dough, you'll want to pinch the ends closed. This helps keep the roll tight and prevents the loaf from unrolling during the final rise or baking process. Take your time with this step. A well-sealed end is the key to a well-shaped loaf. Remember, the goal here is not perfection, but consistency. A consistent shape will ensure a consistent bake, and that's what we're aiming for. So don't worry if your loaf doesn't look like it came straight from a bakery display window. As long as it's tightly rolled and well-sealed, you're on the right track. And there you have it. A dough that was once a shaggy mass is now a beautifully shaped loaf, ready to take on its final rise. The transformation is nothing short of magical, isn't it? But don't get too attached just yet. The best is yet to come. With our loaf shaped, we're ready for the final rise. Our bread is almost ready for the oven. This stage of the process we're about to embark on is known as the final rise, or the second proofing. It is a crucial part of bread making that requires a delicate balance of patience and timing. The second rise is where the magic happens. This is when our dough, already shaped into a beautiful loaf, will increase in size one last time before we introduce it to the heat of the oven. The yeast, our little friends in the dough, are still hard at work, creating more gas bubbles that cause the dough to expand. This is what gives our bread its light and airy texture. It's important to note that the duration of the second rise can vary. It could be as short as half an hour or extend to over an hour. It all depends on the temperature of your kitchen and the type of bread you're making. But don't worry, you don't need to be a timekeeper. What you need to be is observant. During this process, you're looking for the dough to almost double in size. A well-risen dough is a sign of a good loaf. But there's a catch. If you let it rise for too long, the yeast can run out of food, causing the dough to collapse. This could result in a dense loaf with a heavy texture. So here's a handy tip. To check if your dough has risen enough, gently press your finger into it. If the indentation springs back slowly but remains visible, your dough is ready for the oven. This final rise, or second proofing, is more than just a waiting game. It's a dance between time and temperature, yeast and baker. It's an art, a science, and a little bit of a guessing game. But when you get it right, the reward is a loaf of bread that is light, airy, and utterly delicious. It's time to heat the oven and prepare for baking. The moment of truth, baking our loaf. We've kneaded, proofed, and shaped. Now it's time to bring it all together and transform our dough into a golden, crusty loaf of bread. This is where the magic happens, where the heat of the oven coaxes the dough to rise one final time, creating a beautifully baked masterpiece. Now, let's start by preheating the oven. The temperature is crucial here. Too hot, and the outside bakes before the inside has a chance to fully cook. Too cool, and the bread can turn out dense and undercooked. The sweet spot for most bread recipes is around 425 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's set our oven to that temperature and give it time to heat up properly. While our oven is warming up, let's talk about how to prepare our loaf for baking. Some bakers like to make a few shallow slashes on the top of the loaf with a sharp knife. This is more than just for aesthetics. It helps control the direction the bread will expand during baking. So, let's do that, creating a pattern of your choice on the surface of our dough. Now that our oven is preheated and our loaf is ready, It's time to put our bread in the oven. The baking time can vary depending on the size and shape of your loaf, but a good rule of thumb is about 20 to 25 minutes for a standard loaf. However, remember, all ovens are different, so it's essential to keep an eye on your bread as it bakes. As the bread bakes, it will start to rise and brown. This is the yeast doing its final work, creating carbon dioxide gas that causes the bread to puff up. The heat also triggers the Maillard reaction, a chemical reaction that gives the bread its golden brown crust and tantalizing aroma. But how do we know when our bread is done? There are a few telltale signs. First, the color. We're looking for a deep golden brown, not too light, not too dark. Second, the sound. If you tap the bottom of the loaf, it should sound hollow. This is a classic baker's trick and a reliable way to check for doneness. However, the most accurate way to ensure your bread is fully baked is to use a digital thermometer. Insert it into the center of the loaf. If it reads between 190 and 210 degrees Fahrenheit, your bread is done. Now resist the temptation to immediately slice into your fresh, hot loaf of bread. I know it's hard, especially with the enticing aroma wafting through your kitchen. But cutting into the bread too soon can cause it to collapse or become gummy. Let it cool on a wire rack for at least an hour before slicing. So there we have it, a perfectly baked loaf of bread, golden brown and fragrant, ready to be savoured and enjoyed. Baking bread is a labour of love, but the end result is so worth it. There's nothing quite like the satisfaction of slicing into a loaf of bread that you've made with your own two hands. As the aromas fill the kitchen, our bread is ready to cool and slice. The perfect slice is the reward for all our hard work. Just imagine, the fresh, warm loaf of bread that you've baked with so much love and care is finally ready. But hold on. Before you dive in, there's one last crucial step we need to cover: slicing it. Yes, that's right. It's not just about hacking into the loaf with any old knife. It's an art, a skill that you can master with a little patience and practice. Now, the first rule of bread slicing: let it cool. I know. It's tempting to cut into that warm, fragrant loaf straight out of the oven. But resist the urge. Cutting into hot bread can squish it, and we don't want that after all the effort we've put in. So give your beautiful loaf some time to cool down. It'll make slicing a lot easier and neater. Next, let's talk about the right tool. The knife is as important as the bread itself. You want a knife that's sharp, long and serrated. The serrations help grip the crust, making it easier to cut through without squishing or tearing the bread. Now onto the technique. Hold your bread steady with one hand, and with the other, position the knife at the top edge of the bread. Apply gentle pressure and use a sawing motion, back and forth, letting the serrations do their job. Don't rush it, take your time. And there you have it, a perfect slice of bread ready for butter, jam, or just to be savoured on its own. Remember, practice makes perfect, so don't get disheartened if your first few slices aren't exactly magazine-worthy. Keep at it, and soon you'll be slicing like a pro. Now all that's left is to enjoy your homemade bread. Baking bread at home is a rewarding and delicious experience. A journey we've embarked on together today, a journey that brought us closer to the heart of home cooking. We began by appreciating the simple yet profound pleasure of freshly baked bread's aroma, a scent that can transform any house into a warm home. We then moved on to gathering our ingredients. Remember, quality matters. The better your ingredients, the better your bread will turn out. Our journey then took us to preparing the dough, the very essence of our bread. Mixing, kneading and resting, all crucial steps towards a perfect loaf. This was followed by the art of proofing, a process that allows our dough to rise and develop those beautiful air pockets. Patience here is key, and the results are well worth the wait. Shaping the loaf was our next step, moulding our dough into a form that's not only pleasing to the eye, but also to the palate. Then, we allowed our shaped dough to have its final rise, another critical step in achieving the perfect texture. And finally, we arrived at the grand finale, baking the bread. Watching it transform from a simple dough to a golden, crusty loaf is nothing short of magical. And slicing it, oh, the joy of slicing into a warm, fresh loaf, the sound of the crust breaking under the knife, the softness of the crumb, it's all part of the experience. But the journey doesn't end there. Remember, using fresh yeast is important for a good rise, and storing the leftover bread correctly will ensure it stays fresh and delicious. Don't forget, practice makes perfect, so don't be disheartened if your first few loaves don't turn out as expected. With these steps and tips, you can fill your home with the irresistible aroma of homemade bread anytime you wish. So, tie on that apron, roll up those sleeves, and let's bake some bread. Subscribe for more delicious recipes and turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest culinary adventures. Until next time, happy baking.